And good afternoon. It is Friday, October 23rd in 2020. And I'd like to read and expand on an essay that I wrote called Hitler's Crusade. And I'll be researching books such as Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Al Smith's Why We War, Christopher Tyerman's The Crusades, a very short introduction. Also, Houston Stewart Chamberlain's Foundation of the 19th Century, Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, and Friedrich Nietzsche's Ecce Homo, or Behold the Man. And so, it's this topic has kind of been done to death as far as like the Nazis and Hitler and everything like that goes. But I hope you can learn something from this because some of these facts are a little more obscure. So, Hitler's rise to power and the Nazis of World War II Germany and the beliefs that they preached were the result of blending type of nationalism and religion into an ideology, and the religious fervor of which was then spread through propaganda, but also through terror and force, which culminated in a sophisticated and efficient murder on, prior to this, an unimaginable scale. Hitler's religion was actually a pan-Germanic mythology that embodied the Aryan race. Similar to the Crusades of the Middle Ages undertaken to liberate the Holy Land, at least that was the intent, Hitler actually sought to reestablish the Holy Roman Empire and liberate German lands from those who did not fit neatly into his own ideological beliefs and ethnic origins. But without finances, leaders, transportations, participants, there wouldn't have been any Crusades in the Middle Ages. Now, as Christopher Tyerman states in his book, all the passion in the universe cannot create war, crusading or not, without the organization and manipulation of recruitment, finance, logistics, military structure, and ideas. And without these, Hitler's crusade would never have gone beyond his own mind in hate-filled ravings. But it was the combination, the joining of the religious faction, such as the Pope, and the monarchs, such as the kings of France, England, and the Holy Roman Emperor, that produced a political relationship necessary to fight and fund a war thousands of miles away. Smith says, to remain king, one must have the support of the Pope. And this is an integral part of war throughout history. Religion coupled with political power. Now, what does this have to do with Nazi Germany? Well, the Holy See objected to the treatment of the Jews, communists, gypsies, and others. Indeed, Catholics were certainly not favored by Hitler. They too were on his list. If Hitler desired the backing of the Catholic Church, he certainly kept this to himself. And so in order to wield the religious power, the divine authority, and the justification that he sought, Hitler reached back through the mists of time. And he brought forth a history of German Romanticism that only existed in oral traditions in the written word. It was ideology and legend, but not fact. Legends and operas full of pan-Germanic rituals and beliefs. He combined them with the perverted interpretation of Nietzsche's Übermensch, the Overman, and then he rewrote history from the standpoint of a master race, a history to which no lesser being could belong, at least in his mind. Thankfully, Germany was not able to sustain this vast war machine, and fighting a war on more than one front was exhausting their military might. Although the Crusades were not successful in liberating the Holy Land, they were successful in other ways. The religion of monarchy of France was created by the kings of France, continual crusading. And this provided the impetus for the elevation of the Kingdom of France by the royal propagandists from approximately 1300 AD into a Holy Land. And the French considered themselves God's chosen people, an example of replacement theology, which helped to perpetuate and justify warfare waged on those outside of a specific sphere, namely Christianity. But Hitler was no Christian, and his success in his personal crusade was actually the systematic extermination of entire ethnic, religious, and social groups of people. In the case of the Jews, half of the population living in Europe were murdered. Now, in Nietzsche's Ecce Homo, from the Latin Behold the Man, he wrote, I know my fate. One day my name will be associated with the memory of something tremendous, a crisis, without equal on earth, the most profound collision of conscience, a decision that was conjured up against everything that had been believed, demanded and hallowed so far. I am no man. I am dynamite. Now this phrase proved to be prophetic, as Nietzsche's philosophy, along with Schopenhauer's, would be used by a small, unattractive man with a comic mustache to preach of a new and glorious Reich spanning 1,000 years of Teutonic glory and dominion. The man, Adolf Hitler, would create a new ideology from the philosophy of Nietzsche, the music of Richard Wagner, whom Hitler referred to as the maestro, and a fierce nationalism which was in part formulated by an Englishman, Houston Stewart Chamberlain, who was enamored of German nationalism and would use this new doctrine to unleash the most devastating war in human history, claiming millions of victims, half of which were non-combatants. Prior to the Second World War, Hitler argued that his chosen people needed more land. Essentially, he believed, or at least he said, that Germans needed a greater, larger Germany, and that Germans should have access to the sea, and that they deserved more land to replace the resources denied to them in the Treaty of Versailles. The wars that were to be waged, he argued, would take back what was taken from the Germans, take by force the territory of others, or resist the colonization of Germans by non-Germans. So here we see one of the most well-known propagandists and mass murderers of history stating that war was a necessity to do what is right by the native population. It would generate wealth, land, and peace for the Germans, and drive out those of impure race, according to Hitler, forcibly seizing what was the native populations by right of birth and destiny, and also conquering new territories. Hitler's persuasive words and speeches, so saturated with lies and propaganda, they seemed perhaps utterly convincing, twisted and distorted historical events. Hitler himself said that the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. He presented the German people with a picture of subservience, suffering the weight of the previous World War, a pre-established value and condition. And while it's true that Germany was in ruins economically, it was hardly the fault of the Jewish people, or the communists, or the labor unions. But it should be noted that Hitler was no more a Christian than he was a Jew. Hitler's Christ was Aryan, not Jewish, and there was no place in Hitler's belief system for a Jewish Messiah. The Jews, referred to in the Old Testament as God's chosen people, were called by Hitler and Nazis in general devils and apes. Hitler saw religion, his own religion, as focusing on man, more specifically the idealized Aryan. He didn't want to focus man's attention on God, but on the God-man, the Superman, the Aryan. Joseph Campbell wrote this type of ideology, and he states that when the ego is enlarged, instead of thinking only of himself, the individual becomes dedicated to the whole of his society. The rest of the world, meanwhile, is left outside the sphere of his sympathy and protection. Because it is outside the sphere and protection of his God, instead of clearing his own heart, the zealot tries to clear the world. So rather than try to coexist, Hitler sought to eliminate, to extinguish, and to clear his world of those he saw as impure or subhuman. Crusading was undertaken for the express purpose of liberation. In the case of the Middle Ages, to liberate the Holy Land. The Prince of Peace was heralded at the end of a sword. In Hitler's crusade, Christ was transformed into a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Superman. Peace was not conducive to Hitler's idealized society, and concessions and collaboration by his intended victims just proved to be a short delay in his plans. Peaceful coexistence was perceived as a threat, and so to Hitler the masses could not be trusted with any truth that contradicted his own ideology. In his own words, he believed those who were meant to rule should rule. And his ideology provides us with one of history's most sobering lessons, that there is no place for any dissenting opinions in a dictatorship. There is no place for religious tolerance in zealot ideology. There is only conformity or extinction.